Hello and welcome to this edition of the Collaborative Corner podcast. I'm Zach Bernard.
And I'm Brianna Barrow. We are your hosts of the Collaborative Corner and happy to have you with us here today.
The Collaborative Corner is a production of the Fort Wayne Media Collaborative with the goal of connecting listeners to the stories and culture of Northeast Indiana.
Through this podcast, we want to bring you the full context of our region, but with each episode by speaking with notable people in local government, entertainment, food, you name it.
Joining us for today's episode, we're talking with Cassie Beer, Women's Fund Director of the Women's Fund of Greater Fort Wayne, and Ilse Knecht, Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Joyful Heart Foundation based in Brooklyn, New York. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Can you share a bit about the mission and goals of both the Women's Fund of Greater Fort Wayne and the Joyful Heart Foundation? How do these organizations complement each other in terms of empowering women and addressing violence?
Sure. So the Women's Fund of Greater Fort Wayne was launched in 2020 by the Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne, largely in response to the discovery that there had not been a comprehensive research study of women and girls in Allen County since 1974. We thought that was maybe a little bit too long to go without taking a look at the state of women and girls in our community. So the Community Foundation commissioned a report from the Community Research Institute here in town, and from that study decided to launch the Women's Fund. And the Women's Fund is designed to be a systems level change agent in our community focused on upstream solutions. So we believe that looks like conducting research, local research, more than once every 50 years. Advocacy in the sense of really looking at our municipal and our state policies to see how are those policies affecting women and girls here? How can we advocate for great policies to support women and girls? And then education in the sense of what are the issues facing women and girls in our communities that we would love the community to be more aware of. And we're focused on these because we know that our direct service agencies are up to their eyeballs in the need and the work. So we want to provide some relief by focusing on those upstream solutions. So we focus those in three areas: economic security for women, doing a lot of work with workplaces to build great places for women to work. Young women and girls, really looking at how can we train organizations to make sure they are safe places for girls to be. And then lastly, which we're going to talk about today and how we got connected to Joyful Heart Foundation, is our work in personal safety. So we learned that in that 2020 report, 1 in 3 women in Allen County experiences domestic violence, which is higher than the national average of 1 in 4. So we had worked with the local court system and with a national organization to really start a domestic violence problem solving court here. And that was how we were connected to Robin, who is now the president and CEO of Joyful Heart Foundation. And when she moved over to Joyful Heart, she shared her information with us. And that's how we learned about their incredible work, which I'll let Ilse talk about.
Thank you, Cassie. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for Joyful Heart Foundation, and I also run the Backlog initiative. So Joyful Heart Foundation was founded in 2004 by Law and Order SVU actress and advocate Mariska Hargitay. Yes, she started in that role and trained for that role, even by training at a rape crisis center. And just as she learned about the problem and the scope of the issues, she became very, kind of enlightened and aware of how these crimes impact survivors. And in fact, she began getting survivor letters. People were sending her letters about their stories of abuse and saying, many of them, I've never told anybody this. But her character on the show, Detective Benson, is how a lot of survivors want their detective to be. And sadly, most survivors don't get that kind of response from law enforcement and from the criminal justice system. And so she really took those stories to heart and thought, I need to do something. And so Joyful Heart Foundation was her do something. And so our focus has been to help survivors heal and reclaim joy in their lives. We focus on creating resources for survivors and for victim advocacy organizations, rights for survivors. And a lot of what we do is raise awareness with our great platform, through Mariska. The other big focus of our foundation for the last 15 years has been ending the rape kit backlog. And that is a nationwide campaign that we launched to address the, at one point, 400,000 untested rape kits that were sitting on shelves in law enforcement storage facilities and hospitals. Wherever they could store them, they were. And some communities had, upwards of 10,000, 11,000 kits. And so we decided we had to fix it. And what we did is came up with our 6-pillar campaign to address the untested rape kits, to identify where they are, test the ones that were found, and then make sure it never happens again. And so that's what we've been doing in Indiana, among some other initiatives there for well, actually since about 2017 or 2014. So it's a little bit about what we do at Joyful Heart Foundation.
So my next question is a little bit more locally based. The Women's Fund of Greater Fort Wayne has conducted extensive research into the challenges that are facing the women and girls in our county. What are some of the most pressing issues that you've uncovered, and how are they going to impact their health or their well-being of all the women and girls in our community who are affected by this?
So I know today we're really talking a lot about sexual violence, and specifically when it comes to sexual assault and sexual violence. We know that about 33% of women in our community experience sexual violence in their lifetime. And as we were conducting that study back in 2020 and listening to the agencies who provide a lot of that direct service work, we heard that our local system of care is really difficult for survivors to navigate. For example, there is one place in the surrounding 19 counties to access a forensic rape kit. So those rape kits that Joyful Heart Foundation advocates to be tested, there's one place where you can access getting that rape kit done. And it's an amazing place. It's a sexual assault treatment center over off Lake, and they do an incredible job. The nurses there are the heroes of the world. But it's really hard to know that that's where you should go if you don't know that's where you should go. So we've really seen some challenges with survivors showing up at the emergency room only to be told they need to go to the sexual assault treatment center. And what happens if they don't have transportation? Well, often they're transported in a police car, which you can imagine that can be incredibly re-traumatizing for a survivor who's just experienced an act of violence to then be taken almost like they're a criminal to get that rape kit. So we've really tried to focus on our local system of care. How can we make it easier for people to know where to go for the type of help they need? For example, the treatment center also has people show up who are looking for therapy and they don't do therapy. So they're sending them to places like the YWCA or Courageous Healing. So we are doing a lot of work to make that system of care easier for survivors to access and easier for agencies to refer clients to one another, so that at least when you need help, it's easier for you to get to it.
The Joyful Heart Foundation focuses on addressing sexual assault, domestic violence, and child abuse. How prevalent are these issues in Indiana, and what unique challenges do survivors face when it comes to seeking justice and healing?
Well, can I just piggyback for a minute on what Cassie just said? And I think it's so important. She's talking about these 33% of women experiencing sexual assault. And we know that these numbers are often underreported because it's very difficult to talk about these issues. In terms of how many survivors are reporting to law enforcement, you could look at those numbers, but that's a quarter of actually what is occurring out there, that 3/4 of survivors actually never report the assault to law enforcement. The vast majority of people never tell anyone. So, even doing some sort of even household-based surveys or, trying to get like a real number that isn't about reporting to law enforcement, it's still very difficult for people to disclose. They might not even understand or call what happened to them sexual assault. So, I just think it's important to recognize these numbers are terribly high, but they're also not really demonstrating what the full scope of the problem is. And so, I'm not an expert in what's going on in Indiana. I think Cassie can respond more to that, but I can say that also the access is a huge issue across the country to to getting a forensic exam done. That's a huge barrier. And when people hear, you might have to go an hour or so or whatever, especially in a cop car, they're probably not going to do it. And, so we just have a whole, unfortunately, set of barriers to folks reporting and getting help. When we started working in Indiana, actually in 2014, we did a Freedom of Information Act to the Indianapolis Police Department to find out what the number of untested rape kits were there. And we're able to bring to light, along with some media folks, that there were 5,006 untested rape kits in the city of Indianapolis alone, which was a very shocking discovery to us, and I think many people in the state. And so, that is, I think, just indicative of kind of the breakdown of the system and how the system, unfortunately, it's not just Indianapolis, of course, or Indiana, it's across the country, does not take the crime of sexual assault seriously, does not prioritize it as the violent crime that it is, even though it is the second most violent crime as categorized by the FBI. But we still don't, we're still working on, getting people to understand this is a violent crime. The offenders that offend in this crime are repeat offenders often, and they're not specialists. They don't just commit sexual assault, they commit all kinds of crime. So when you look at 5,000 untested rape kits, you have to remember each one of those represents, somebody who at that time of the assault was in Indiana, probably an Indiana resident. So these kids represent a person who's gone through one of the most terrible things they'll go through in their whole life, and also represents a dangerous offender that is potentially still walking on the streets of Indiana or Indianapolis, and committing crimes over and over again because they don't stop until they're stopped.
Oh, gosh. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to that question, Cassie, about numbers in Indiana?
Sure. So we do know that Indiana ranks fourth in the nation for reported high school rape. So we also know, like Ilse said, that number that they received from the Freedom of Information Act was only Marion County's warehouse. There are 2 other warehouses that didn't even respond to the Freedom of Information Act request. So we actually don't even know how many untested rape kits are in Indiana. That was just Marion County alone. So we know that this goes back to a lot of things, like also Indiana has one of the shortest statute of limitations on sexual crimes in the country. It's only 5 years. If you have been raped, you have 5 years to press charges. So that's why when it comes to the legislation that's currently happening right now, the bills that are in session right now are so important, both to fund the testing of the backlog and also to pass the removal of the statute of limitations, so that whatever these kits uncover are also able to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Got it. I'll move on to the next question here too. So House Bill 1413, which is a big part of today's conversation, is a bill that was introduced, and it establishes the Rape Kit Backlog Fund to provide assistance to law enforcement agencies and testing labs to eliminate that backlog of untested rape kits. So could both of you talk a little bit about the significance of what this bill would mean for survivors of sexual assault, and how it will impact the larger movement towards justice and accountability in cases of sexual violence? I know you just mentioned there are criminals walking around. Do you see the potential for people getting prosecuted, or because it's been so long with this backlog that they might get to walk free if it's past the statute?
Yeah. Cassie, do you want to start? I feel like, you're the local. I would love to hear the local perspective.
It's
first.
great. I think it's good for honestly for you to answer this and talk about some of the prosecution of serial rapists and the numbers that the Joyful Heart Foundation has seen in other states of why this could be really impactful.
Yeah, I mean, it is a real problem that you have such a short statute of limitations, because these kits, I mean, we uncovered the 5,000 kits in 2014. Do the math. I mean, some of these kits, they're still struggling at the Indianapolis Crime Lab. We were there a couple of years ago, and they still had about 5,000 kits because more are coming in. And if you're not keeping up, you're not keeping up. And so I think recognizing that those cases are likely not going to be able to be prosecuted, and that that does mean that those offenders get away with that particular assault. Now, the one thing that's important to recognize, though, is about how the DNA database works. So I won't get too technical, but if you put rape kits, the DNA found in the rape kits in the DNA database, Indiana has their own, and then there's the one that's national that it's connected to. That DNA may connect to the DNA of a previously convicted offender. And so that's how the database works, is you make matches between these DNA profiles. What we often see then is that it might match to another case and another case and another case. And so you could maybe potentially match to a case that's still within the statute of limitations and, go after it from that perspective. It also just gives law enforcement knowledge about this offender, right? So they may, I mean, Cleveland and Detroit and other places that have been testing their backlog have found a ridiculous number of serial offenders that have been committing crime that's over decades. There was one in particular in Cleveland that had, I think, 27 kids connect. And if you think about that, as probably, a quarter, it's a quarter of the people are reporting. And then that's really, it's really scary. So just in terms of kind of identifying and prosecuting serial offenders, it makes it so much easier to prosecute these offenders when you have that DNA evidence that is connecting up. Because in some cases, you might have this, what we sometimes just call he said, she said case, right? Where they know each other in some way. But then if you get crimes that are connecting to each other, then you get he said, she said, she said, she said, and it builds a case. And that way it might be easier for prosecutors to take on those cases. So, there are a lot of reasons to continue to test these backlog kits, even if you find that the statute of limitations has run out.
One of my favorite examples that the Joyful Heart Foundations and the Backlog website talks about is in Ohio, and we've pulled this a lot and talked about it a lot as we've been meeting with legislators, is when Ohio passed similar legislation that we're seeing, like House Bill 1413, it resulted in the prosecution of 511 serial rapists.
Yeah.
With like 812 indictments.
Yeah.
And so the idea that, that the opposition to this bill is like, oh, it's just women who are claiming something happened. No, when you can point to 511 cases that had multiple rape kits tied to them, that's not just a couple that got in a disagreement and the woman's trying to get back. Like it's really a tool to really bring to justice those individuals who are committing sexual violence after sexual violence after sexual violence. Like, so that's why we are very, very passionate about both House Bill 1413 and Senate Bill 151 with the statute of limitations making it through this session.
Yeah. No, this is amazing work that's happening too. Ideally, it'll pass in the Senate. I don't know if it has yet.
So House Bill 14 has made it through the House. So now it's going to the Senate, and Senate Bill 151 has made it through the Senate and now needs to go through the House. So House Bill 1413 needs to go through the Corrections and Criminal Law Committee, and the statute of limitations needs to go through the same named committee on the House side.
Got it. Yeah. No, that is great news. I know it's I interviewed someone about a movie that was dealing with this kind of topic, and what someone had said, and I think it's a pretty common saying amongst sexual violence survivors, is that like you feel violated the first time, obviously, by the initial instance of it, and then it's like a second violation when there's no justice from the system that's supposed to protect you or at least prosecute, the offenders. So ideally, we'll start to see some progress in that. Let Zach take it away to the next question here.
Can I just add to that? Can I add to that for 1 second?
Yeah,
because I think it's such an important point, and what our founder always says is that the rape kit backlog is a demonstration of how the criminal justice system and our society treats these crimes. So you think about a kit sitting on a shelf, it's literally and figuratively, right, shelving what happened to rape victims. And so when we're not testing these kits, we're sending a terrible message to survivors that what happened to them didn't matter. And also to offenders, right? If they're here, they're not testing rape kits, we're just basically giving them a free pass.
I'll
I have
stay
a
with you.
quick question, real quick, actually.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to get a bill passed, in any legislature, right? So I was wondering if you could talk about sort of your experience working with lawmakers to try to get these bills passed in legislatures across the country, the ones that you're working in, with particular focus in Indiana. What's that been like? Were there challenges, or was there mostly support, or how's that gone?
Yeah. Well, okay. It's really interesting actually, because this issue is wonderfully bipartisan. We have only had one state in the history of my working on this, which has been more than 20 years, that it became a partisan fight. And that's Wisconsin. I'll just say it. It was, and eventually it got done, but it is a bipartisan issue. It's an issue that most people, when they hear about, can't believe it's happening, actually. They kind of go, wait, what? We're collecting these and we're not testing them? Who does that? And so it's one of these issues it's a little bit difficult to understand, but once people understand it, they go, well, we're going to fix this. And we're like, well, that's great because we have a plan. So it faces all the same things that other kinds of bills face, which the clock runs out, or there's a lot of different priorities. We ran into issues in different years with a lot of abortion legislation or other things kind of getting in the way. But in general, these bills move relatively quickly. I'll say one of the things is having a really dedicated and committed sponsor. So, Senator Kreider was the first legislator really in Indiana to get anything done on this issue. And we called him up and said, we know you worked on some statute of limitations reform. I think it was Jenny's law years ago. Okay, don't quote me on that. But Senator Kreider had worked on some statute of limitations reform. And we said, do you want to work on this maybe? Indiana hasn't counted their untested rape kits. So he did sponsor the first legislation really that addressed this in 2017 to do a one-time inventory in the state. And after that, he's had several bills. He helped create the tracking system and just has been a great sponsor. So you need a champion really, and one person gets it and runs with it. And then that's kind of really where it starts. And it's also that public opinion is so easy to get on our side on this because, again, people hear that this is happening and they really are just surprised and shocked and angry. And especially when they know that there are dangerous people that are walking the streets in their communities because the criminal justice system has not done its job and taken these cases seriously. So anyway, we have a lot of that on our side. And because we have our 6 pillars of reform that we can say to every state, do this and you will end your backlog and it will never happen again. And it'll give survivors rights to know where their kid is. Do this and, then you're good. So that's really easy for us to just hand everybody sort of this plan and help them carry it out.
I'll say too, it's exciting to see House Bill 1413 passed with unanimous support through the House.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I mean, it's very rare.
Yeah, it feels like
Yeah.
it's easy to get.
I mean, it does come down to money a lot of the time. Even when we're in states that they want to do it, they're like, oh, but the money. And, we're like, well, you put your money where your priorities are. And, you can find money for the things that you want to do. And in the end, testing rape kits actually saves you money. It saves communities money. So, we can present that information that has come out of Cleveland and Detroit and other places to say you actually are saving money when you do this, especially in like future averted costs of victimization. So that kind of solves the money problem. But that generally is like actually the biggest problem is the money.
No, this is interesting too. And jumping ahead, I know Ilse, as I understand, I read your little spiel on your website. So you have 20 years invested in the victim advocacy, and you're a nationally recognized expert on the rape kit backlog. So it's nice to see that you believe this legislation is going to kind of address some of those systemic issues that have led to this. So I'll jump ahead here. So how can our local organizations like us, I mean, we're a small journalism organization, but how can other local organizations, advocates, or community members collaborate with the Women's Fund of Greater Fort Wayne, as well as more national organizations like the Joyful Heart Foundation, to create more long-term systemic change and improve the lives of these women and girls who are victims of this violence in Indiana?
Oh, Cassie, I think that's for
Maybe
you.
first.
Yeah, I think that's a good one for you.
Absolutely. So I would say for organizations and individuals who want to help create change for women, I would say listening to women and girls is the most important thing that we can do. We can listen to women and girls and believe them and speak up when we have the power to do so. Like right now, in the middle of this legislative session, we need advocates to stand up and contact their representatives, contact their senators, and ask for these bills to get a hearing before April to make sure that they make it through. So contacting your legislators does matter. I know, especially in Indiana, it can feel sometimes it can feel really hard. It can feel really isolating when you're trying to make a change, especially for issues of sexual violence. But I will say, now is the time to speak up on behalf and with women and girls, and to put your support behind some of these. I will say too, for workplaces, it's an important time to pass policies in your workplace for having zero tolerance policies for sexism and harassment, making sure that if someone on your team experiences sexual or domestic violence, that they're able to access family medical leave to fully heal and take care of themselves. It's making sure that if someone on your staff has a protective order, that doesn't negatively impact how you're scheduling them or their ability to come to work, or even that you can help secure a workplace protective order. So we need workplaces to really ask and listen to women on their teams about how they can show up for women on their staff. And we need people in positions of power to say that this matters, that women who have experienced, and it's not just women who've experienced sexual violence, that we need to stand up for survivors of sexual violence and say that we're going to make sure your voice is heard and that you get your day in court if you want it.
So, looking ahead, what are some of the key areas of focus for both the Women's Fund of Greater Fort Wayne and Joyful Heart Foundation in the new year? Are there any new initiatives or partnerships on the horizon that will address women's health and safety?
Yes, so right now the Women's Fund is really convening our domestic violence organization. So really trying to look at the ecosystem of care for those who are experiencing domestic violence. So this year we're having quarterly convenings to really listen to how are the agencies working together? Do we know what one another do? Like, do we know what other agencies do, what they provide? How are our referral systems working? Because we really want to make sure that we're providing that entire continuum of care for survivors who are experiencing domestic violence and sexual violence. The Women's Fund also on March 12th will have our Women in the Workplace Luncheon, where we are going to celebrate employers who are meeting or exceeding the metrics nationally when it comes to how we're supporting women in the workplace. So we really want to put a stake in the ground and say it matters how many women are in leadership in organizations. It matters how we are building our compensation practices to make sure that they're supportive of women. It matters that we have supportive benefits and policies that really support caregiving and physical safety. So that is an annual event that we do to really lift up employers who are doing a good job with that. So those are a couple of things we're working on this year.
That's amazing. I'll just add that, our commitment to helping in Indiana to pass the 6 pillars of reform is strong. We would like to see another inventory done across the state to see what the status of the backlog is, because the state, does not have the mandated testing of all the newly collected kits that are coming in. We don't know what the real state of the backlog is right now. So we have sort of older numbers. It'd be great to get newer numbers. We would like to focus on ensuring moving forward that all newly collected kits are tested in a timely manner. And then one of the other things that we're working on just generally at Joyful Heart is image-based abuse. So we're working on the non-consensual disclosure of intimate images, making sure that states have good laws in place that are strong laws that protect survivors and give them rights. but that also give prosecutors and law enforcement the tools to address these cases, making sure that they cover synthetic images, that's giving, survivors a civil cause of action to sue offenders. Indiana working more on the backlog and getting the mandatory testing moving forward, and victims' rights to know the status of their kit is where our focus will be in the coming years.
Got it. Is there anything else that I didn't ask that you guys would like to touch on before we end the call?
Just say thank you for asking about this. This is such an important issue that a lot of agencies have been working on for over a decade. So to have this awareness and interest in it is encouraging, and hopefully a good sign that we get some good stuff done this session.
Yeah, and I'll say also, one person can make a difference. It really is, it feels hard, I think, for people to sometimes contact their legislator, or they think it doesn't really matter, I'm just one person. For a small office, 20 calls can really shift the way that the tide is going. So, and you don't have to be an expert. You just call and say, I care about women and girls and sexual assault, and I just want you to pass this bill. Do what you can. And also just in your personal life, like Cassie said, trusting and believing women and girls, even on a one-on-one interaction, can make a huge difference, shift the energy for that person, for their life, to have someone believe them. So, there's so many levels that you can take a stand for women and girls and boys, and obviously LGBTQ people and trans folks. All of these folks are sexually assaulted, and just believing somebody when they tell you this happened to them can really make a huge difference.
If anyone local wants to jump in the advocacy fight, I just invite them to come along with the Women's Fund. We have a legislative kickoff every year where we talk about the bills that have been filed and what we're going to track. We're having actually today, in a few minutes, having a legislative update now that we've passed the halfway mark and the deadline for bills to make it through whichever side they started on, and talk about what you can do to help push forward bills like House Bill 14. And then we'll have a wrap-up session as well and talk about what happened this year and what's it going to mean for women and girls. So we really do try to give people here in Northeast Indiana good, solid data to use to contact their legislators with, to understand how the legislative process works. So we're hopeful to be a resource for those who want to get started and use their voice.